Hello, this is Memije with IT Supplies. Today we're going to go over how to use the spot color tools in GMG's PrintFactory. So let's get started here. I'm going to start with a printer that does not have any spot colors or spot color libraries within it, so that you can see how you can create one from scratch. Okay, so a lot of people don't realize where the spot color libraries are. They're assuming that there's some sort of a module that you would click on to open up a tool where you would find your different printers and workflows and things like that. Well, essentially that tool lies within the GMG PrintFactory calibrator. Okay, and so in here I'll go ahead and select one of these printers here. I'll go ahead and choose the glossy media. Let's just choose this one at the top here, and you can see underneath the print mode here we have the spot colors tools. Okay, so I really like the implementation of this, because basically what GMG and Orlon are showing you here is that this spot color library or spot colors within is specific to this print mode with these print settings for this media and this printer inkset combination, right? So as soon as you start to change to a different media or potentially a different printer, the spot colors would render differently based on differences in white point, ink receptive layer, gamut volume based on the ink set, the characteristic of the print head and how it renders color. So there's a lot of things at play here. So I really like this implementation, that the operator will know that these values are for this specific print mode, this specific media printer ink combination. Okay, so let's get started here. So the easiest way to just go ahead and add a spot color is to just go ahead and hit this plus button here at the bottom, and it opens up this dialog. And within this dialog, you can see that I can go ahead under the CXF tab here, I can go ahead and import a CXF library maybe that I created somewhere else. This is not a bad idea. So if you created a, for instance, a master spot color library for all the colors that you utilize, you can easily move that around into PrintFactory to whichever printer, media combinations you have. Okay, so that's one way, is if you've already had something you've already previously created, this would basically export that out after you've basically measured in something into this dialog here. If I had a spectrophotometer connected, I believe that it would let me measure those colors here, and then I can export those colors out as a CXF library, which is really nice. The other ways to add colors into here are to add them via LAB as well as CMYK. Okay, so with LAB, if you're not familiar, CIE Lab color space is basically our three-dimensional color space that describes what a human's visual sight is, what we can see in terms of the colors that we can see with our own eyes, right? So essentially L being the luminance line, where 0L is black and 100L is white. And then the A axis, which is our horizontal axis, where plus A moves towards magenta and minus A moves towards green. And our B axis, which is a vertical axis, where plus B is yellow and minus B is blue. So any color that you measure with a spectrophotometer will measure an LAB value. Okay, so when we use instruments, this is the numerical value that we get back from the instrument. So some people prefer to work in LAB because that's an easy way to tune your color. If something was too dark, I can up the color a couple L star points. Maybe let's just create a color here as I'm talking. So let me just say my luminance is a 50, my A star is a 70, and my B star is a 35. Okay, so that's basically giving me a really, pretty dense red here. Okay, So for instance, if I'm in an LAB environment, let's just say I printed this color and I measured it and it measured a 48. Well, then obviously this L star value is not correct, right? It's giving me too dark of a color. So if I actually need a 50 and I'm measuring a 48, maybe my next move to tune this color is to change that to a 52. Okay? And then at the same time, let's just say when I measured that initial print of this color, it came out to be a 72 A star, not a 70. So that basically means there's too much magenta there. So in order for me to tune this, maybe I drop 2 points out of the magenta so I can get that 70 that I'm wanting for the spot color, right? And then, for instance, for the B star value, let's say the B star value was a 33 measured, and I need a 35. Well, that's measuring not enough yellow, so I need to add yellow to this color in order for me to get my wanted spot color. So maybe I would change that to a 37. So you can see how easily with an instrument you can tune your spot colors, in an LAB environment. So let me go ahead and just change these back because I want to create this color as my wanted spot color, meaning this is the value that I want to measure on my instrument, okay? So really interesting, and I'll just call this Jim's red, okay? And then I can create an opacity for that color if I desire. And then in here, when I select the CMYK, you'll see that based on this glossy media through these print settings at this resolution, that this LAB value provided a CMYK recipe that will go through my ink system, right? Notice that it didn't utilize any cyan ink here in order to make this red. All it needed was magenta, yellow, and a little bit of black, okay? So the other way you can actually create your spot colors as well. So let me go ahead and just add this color in here, and you can see I've added that in LAB. So if I wanted to add an additional color, let me just go ahead and add a color in CMYK just so you can see. So let's just say I want to do an 80 cyan. I want to do a 45 magenta, a 0 yellow, and let's just do a 30, we'll do a 20 black, like that. So this is the blue that I'm looking for. And you can see I brought it in as a CMYK recipe instead, right? So you can do it either way, whatever's most comfortable for you. People work in different ways. Just keep in mind when you are measuring with an instrument, you are not getting a CMYK value back. So you would need to make adjustments to CMYK based on the values you receive from the spectrophotometer, okay? A little bit more tedious work, but still doable. So if I go back into here, now you can see based on my CMYK recipe, it's giving me a prediction based on this particular print mode media printer combination of what that LAB will come back as. Now, personally, I'm like, I almost feel like I should write this down, measure these colors in to see how accurate of a prediction it's giving me. Knowing GMG's history, I'd be surprised if it wasn't very accurate. Okay, so another way again, if I was to keep it on the CMYK tab and I add it in here, notice over to my right, it's actually adding that CMYK value instead of the LAB value. So it's going to render that spot color as a CMYK workflow as opposed to an LAB workflow. And there can be differences there in RIPs between the two. Not for this video, a little more complicated. So let's just say you can use either workflow and generally tune your colors minus potential gamut limitations based on an ink set media combination. Okay? So that's how you would add an individual color. I showed you how to add a CXF spot color library. You could also import CXF libraries into here as well. And you notice when I clicked on the import button in the lower right hand corner here, I've got some custom libraries that I've built, of course, but also Like for instance, I can go ahead and import this April 2020 video master spots, and I can replace the values that are in here, and it should bring those in here. I have a feeling it's not going to allow me to, and I know why. So I apologize for even trying that. I haven't created yet anything for the 9570. That particular workflow was for a completely different printer, so I'm glad it did not allow me to import that, because those are measured values from a different printer. Okay, so essentially, other ways to work in here are to actually click on something like the duplicate spot color. So I can basically say this is Jim's red V2. So instead of exporting spot colors out of PrintFactory, or spot color libraries, I should say, to tune them, sometimes people will utilize it like this. So I want to keep the original red's values so I know what that is, so that when I'm actually measuring in, I know this is the wanted value I want back out of the instrument. But essentially we know that even if I feed the system this value, it's not necessarily going to give that back to me, right? Because, you know, the system doesn't know what media you're going to, what its potential gamut potential is, you know, what printer this is. It doesn't know those things. So if you use this same value across all printers and medias, you're going to get some slight differences from printer to printer, and media to media, essentially. So you might do something like this, where, you know, I need a 50, 70, 35, but in order for me to get there, I choose 52, 68, and 37 in order to get the color to measure this way, right? So I can go ahead and add that in there, and now that color is going to give me my wanted value, let's say. Okay, so that's another way of working with this. Instead of actually exporting, only exporting all of your original master values, which I believe is a really good idea to do, because you're going to need to refer to those original values, what they were, to make your edits. And also, if you're doing any quality control where you're in production and you need to QC whether these spots are coming out correctly, maybe the operator has a spectrophotometer by his side. He can measure spot colors in, and he can see whether or not he's hitting that color currently, right, in production. We do actually have some spectrophotometers that are basically dedicated handhelds, where you can actually import your CXF libraries into the instrument, and then you can have a QC mode where you can bring that color up, that color name up, and it knows what the value is supposed to be. So you measure your sample, and it'll tell you the delta E difference of that color, right? So you can see, based on this media printer combination, another really nice thing about GMG's PrintFactory in the spot color rep, at least in this LAB environment here, you can see it's telling me that I can hit this at a 0 delta E. So it's telling me, based on this print mode, I could hit this color no problem whatsoever. So if I was to add another color in here, I'm going to say Jim Saturated. So let's just say I added another color, and I called this 100 cyan, 98 magenta. Well, actually, let me do this in LAB. It might be a little bit easier. So let's just say I said 5 L star, and then I said, you know, 67 A star and minus 80 B star, just like that. Let's just say Jim Saturated color. Now you can see over here on the right that this color is completely out of gamut of this particular printer and media combination. It's giving me a 12 delta E. I certainly cannot hit that color. So a really nice tool that it gives you a prediction of which spot colors are going to be within the gamut of that media or not. So this is a nice thing to be able to explain to a customer or to management if they're not familiar with spot color management, that it's just not physically possible on this printer inkset media combination. Okay, so the next thing I want to go over here is the tuning feature. And what's really nice about this is basically a swatch book workflow. So based on the color that I have selected, and notice that I've selected one at a 12 delta E, right? I want to try to get that color as close as I can for that customer. So knowing that it's an out of gamut color, let's see how close we can get essentially, right? So basically what this means here, it's showing you your original and then the current, the current color. I'm not going to select that patch as a reference, but basically the differences here. And essentially I can basically create a swatch book print chart based on one dimension, 2 dimensions, or 3 dimensions. Okay, so essentially, and I can choose any of these as the reference, right? So after I'm done printing, I could go back in and choose in here which patch I felt was the closest to the one that I wanted, right? And I can choose that, and that becomes the reference, and then I can say okay, and that becomes the new recipe essentially. Okay, so in here, one dimension, so let's just say I can do this in variation of LAB or LCH. So we've talked about LAB. The only difference between the two is L being luminance again, C being chroma or saturation, or how far out are the A and B channels. And then hue, which is basically on the perimeter of CIE lab, the hue is basically the angle or the tone of the color that we're getting, right? So I might want more of a magenta blue or more of a warmer blue. So I can change my hue angle differences here to give me something closer to what the wanted color is. Typically, what you're going to find is if you are 12 delta E off, most likely you're going to see L star or saturation, probably saturation being probably the most prevalent in terms of why you're not hitting that color. It's just outside of the gamut of the printer in terms of saturation. So what I recommend to customers is try to get the hue angle correct. As long as it's a gradient of the original color, but maybe a little bit less saturated, it's usually more acceptable for the customer. They understand typically that you might not be able to hit complete saturation, especially if it's something that they've been printing for many, many years. They've already run into this situation before, okay? And then in here, I can also choose like how big of a patch size I want. So I could say 1 inch patch, a 2 inch patch, however, whatever size I'd like, right? And then I can basically in here, I can choose in one dimension if I want to change the difference in brightness. So I'll just make a big step here so you can see. So you can see the difference in brightness here. That's a really big step. Let me go back down to something more like that. So that's changing the brightness there. I can change it in terms of the A star value. That means the levels of magenta. And I'll just change that here so you can see a much, much bigger difference. Okay. And then, or I can change the B star value, right? So the warmth, how much warmer or how much cooler that particular color is going to show. I'm showing this in a drastic change just so you can see that it is actually doing something. You're going to probably have finer steps, probably somewhere between a 2 and a 3 in terms of differences, right? So you're not going to want to have too big of a variant, especially if you're already very, very close to that color, right? So, and the other thing that I can do is I can choose, like, let's just say as many as 3 dimensions. So now it's giving me variances of, let's just say, lightness, the A axis, as well as the B axis, okay? And I'm just going to say in here, we're going to have 10 different combinations on the B axis as well, with that much of a difference. So typically when people utilize these swatch book charts, they're usually either have a swatch that they want to match, and then they're going to bring that swatch up to the printed material and see which patch is the best patch to utilize, right? And you can see as I thumb over, it's giving me the recipes for this. It's giving me the LAB differences. It's also giving me the LCH differences, right? So essentially in here, you notice that it created now 9 pages, right? So if I go ahead and print this, cannot be smaller than 0.394. So it won't allow me to do 2 inches. We'll do 1 inch. So it'll be many less pages actually. So we'll go ahead and print that, and we'll go over into the RIP queue here, and we'll see this print file come in momentarily after it's created. It'll be just one moment. You have to figure it's creating 10 variations of each of these combinations. So it's 10 times 10 times 10, or 1,000 patches essentially. Now when you're doing this, if you've already hit brightness, do a 2-dimensional. No need, you've already got the brightness down. You just need variances in maybe the A and B channel. Or if your brightness and your A axis is perfect, well then you only need to do a 1-dimensional with variances in the B channel. So you can see how when you're getting very close to a color, you can really hone in on your color here. It's taking just a little bit, there we go. It's going to send it to the RIP now. I believe it might be on here. And I'll go ahead and open that in the inspector. And you can see it's populating all of my different colors here. So this is going to be what's printed. So you can see this is a really extensive look at this color. You probably wouldn't print this many patches initially. You're trying to get something closer. I'm doing 3 dimensions. Most likely you won't need to go that far. Okay, so that's the swatch book workflow. You can visually look at this with maybe known swatches. You can also measure these patches after they're printed and see what the LAB value is, and find the one that's closest in LAB value to your wanted value. And then that's going to be the new recipe to get you that blue, that gem saturated blue. Okay, so that's one other way to work. Let me go into a different printer now and show you a already done spot color library, as you can see here. And then I can use this other feature in PrintFactory's calibrator where it'll actually generate a color look. Now I really like this if I'm working in an LAB environment, you know, or I'm working with a spectrophotometer to measure these colors to see how far off I am, because this gives me my whole spot color library. And what's really nice about this is after you've tuned your colors and you've gotten everything dialed in, it's really nice to be able to print this file on each of your substrates so that operators have that at the ready. So whenever they're printing on that particular media, they could bring this print up to that particular production job and see, am I hitting the colors in this job? Okay, and so with this, I can do things like I can make this as big as I like. I can make these 3 inches by 3 inches if I want. I'm going to have to make the document size bigger, of course. So let's just say 20, you know, by 12, something like that. Looks like I'm going to have to go even bigger. So we'll say 24 inch wide. We'll say 20 here, and we'll say 6 across, and we'll say 8 down, something like that. So I'm going to need to be higher down here. And so you can see how I can very easily work this. The label is definitely very small, but you can see if I make that label too big, you really do want it like this so that you can get all of the text for each of these colors in here. And of course it's giving me the delta E values, gamut warnings, and then the original for the file output, of course, of the original values of these colors. Okay, so I can call this Jim's spots, and I can go ahead and I can export this as a PDF or a .AUR if I wanted to bring it back into here. So I can call this Jim Spots, put it on my desktop, and now I've created a PDF that I can utilize of the known wanted values that I can utilize for prints and, you know, other environments or things like that. So really nice to get your master spot color file, spot colors out on the actual medias themselves. Okay, let's go back in there again. And again, Jim Spots. And basically, the other thing you can do is go ahead and print this, of course, and it's going to go ahead and bring that over. I'm going to have to go to this printer here, and now we can look at the inspector. And here's our print job here with a lot more detail. I can go ahead and zoom in on different areas to see what's going on. I can see the name. It's giving me the delta E value. It's basically showing me that all of these, except for maybe this black, is under a delta E of 1. But the majority of these colors I'm able to hit without any issue. Okay, I can scroll across and see. I'm sure I can rotate this to make this a little bit easier as well to look at, but you get the idea. I really enjoy the inspector to really analyze any of my print jobs. Okay, so then you would print this out, and you can use this in an LAB workflow again, and essentially after you've printed it, you can save out your master library because those are your known values, right? And then so you can import that at a later date if you like, and then you can start working on these colors, tuning them and changing your recipes to give you the wanted values that you want back. Okay, so I've gone through a number of different ways to help you build spot color libraries, add spot colors, how to tune those with swatch books as well as with the color books. There's one last tool in here that I'd like to mention, other than the import dialog. If you needed to import CXF libraries into here, this print mode, or export those libraries, there's this black generation feature in GMG PrintFactory. So essentially, not sure why it defaults to 95. Maybe that's based on the print mode, but at the very least, I'd probably want to use full black potential if I can. There's going to be a special use case where you would drop that back, certainly, maybe because of bleeding or something like that. But the black start is very important to understand. So, for instance, in this case, being a 4-color printer with only a dark black ink, if I start black ink at 5%, essentially my natural here, my the Army tan most likely, I've got a cream up at the top, that highlight color up there, potentially this gray, this lighter optic yellow, the yellow here. Essentially your highlight colors, your quarter tones, your lower mid tones, those colors, if you start black at 5% with only a dark black ink, it's going to cause those colors to look not as clean. You're going to see black speckling in those colors, so keep that in mind. If I only have one black ink, I might not start black ink until, as late as 50%, maybe even 60% if I know that my CMY gray balance allows me to print all colors up to 60% without any black ink at all. Okay, if I had a light black ink, like I had a dark black ink and a light black ink, I might be dropping this to between 30 and 40. Okay, if I had, as well as the light black, a light black, I might be dropping that like the 9570 we were looking at earlier. I might be dropping that from somewhere to 15 to 20%, because I know when it utilizes that light black ink, it's not going to be dark speckles like if it was using the full black ink cartridge. Okay, so that's the last feature I wanted to show you here in GMG's PrintFactory's calibrator, spot color tools. I hope you found this useful. Please feel free to reach out to IT Supplies with any questions that you have. We have a large technician team. I'm the main color specialist for IT Supplies. So in terms of this sort of thing, you probably want to address those questions to me. But happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thanks so much for watching this. If you would like to see more of these videos, please go to our YouTube channel.